Welcome to the Business of Hearing podcast, the podcast for high-performing hearing care clinics that want to learn the strategies, ideas, and truths behind some of the smartest private practice clinics in the world. Now, time for your hosts, Phil M. Jones and Ollie Luke.
So welcome to our very, very first summer camp, and got one hell of a guest. Alan, I know that you're there. Why don't you come on and say hi to us all?
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to join you guys. Oh, I've got to unclick mine. My bad.
I got you. Look at that. Have you got shorter?
I sure hope not. All right, now I should be all set. Oh, it's great to see you, Phil, and it's certainly great to join all of the friends that you have attending right now.
Hey, Alan, it's so good to be able to jam out in this conversation today. We have been promoting to the group as a whole this brilliant read in Raise Your Game. And I know I've enjoyed not only the book, but more so the conversations that we've had in the times that we've shared together about peak performance, about how we grow, about how we self-evaluate using our own methods, about how we bring towards our own performance, and also learning about the impact that you have in the world through the thousands of people that you've helped and the dozens of big brands that you've been able to go on and support. So it's a real privilege to have you in this unique, intimate setting, sharing some of your wisdom, some of your experience with a group of some of the most dynamic aspirational hearing care clinics across the United States. Now, I've told them a little bit about you. I've made them do some reading up about you. But why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background through your lens so we can understand where you're coming from?
Most certainly. And please know the feeling's very mutual, man. It's been too long since I've seen you, and it's wonderful to connect with you, and always an honor to get to meet new folks. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, as a keynote speaker that hasn't been able to speak for the last 12 weeks, doing these types of calls is as good as it gets. This is the highlight of my day and my week, so I'm looking forward to having some fun. As far as the background, I think the most important thing to know is that basketball was really my first identifiable passion. And I fell in love with the game of basketball at 4 or 5 years old. And the reason that's important is 4 decades later, here in my mid-40s, basketball is still a major pillar in my life, both personally and professionally. And I'm incredibly grateful that I've been able to make a living and build a life doing something that I'm so passionate about. And I was able to be a fairly decent high school and college player. But then when I was in college, I started to develop an equal affinity for performance training and strength and conditioning and basketball-specific fitness. So when I graduated college, there was really only one path that I wanted to pursue, and that was marrying my original love of the sport of basketball with my newfound love of performance training, strength, conditioning, and fitness. And I became a basketball performance coach. And I did that mostly at the youth and high school level, worked a ton of summer camps for almost 20 years before I decided to make this intentional pivot into the corporate world and share the mindsets and rituals and routines and disciplines that I had learned from some pretty epic players and show folks how to apply those to their life and to their businesses. And that's what I do now, but I never have and never will actually leave the game of basketball.
So tell me this real quick, is you've worked with some of the game's greats through the years, right? Is give me maybe the top 3 players that you've worked with and then the top handful of lessons that you've picked up from working with those players.
Well, what's really neat about my journey is I got to see some of basketball's greats from 2 very distinctly different vantage points. I worked at 2 high schools here in the Washington, D.C. area where I got to work with Kevin Durant, Victor Oladipo, and Markelle Fultz when they were 14, 15, and 16 years old. So I got to meet them and work with them before they became NBA superstars. So I got to see the before picture, if you will. Then I was able to do some contract work with Nike and with Jordan Brand and USA Basketball, and I got an opportunity to work with players that were already established. Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Stephen Curry. And I got to see the after picture of what it takes to not only achieve a high level of performance and success, but then how do you sustain that and continue to grow? So I believe my background is unique, that I've been able to see the before and the after. And that's where I've kind of come up with these handful of lessons that are certainly outlined in the book. But these lessons, I mean, they guide everything that I do in my life. As a father, they guide my parenting, as a speaker, as an author. So these handful of principles that I learned through the game, I hold very near and dear to my heart. And the very first one of those that I think is good medicine for us all to take routinely is something that Kobe Bryant taught me back in 2007. And he said that the secret to his success was that he never gets bored with the basics. And that I take that into my own life to mean we should all be in constant pursuit of mastery of the fundamentals, especially during the unseen hours, if we want to get good at anything. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the specific niche of becoming a better speaker or actually running a thriving business. We have to decide what the basics are, and we have to relentlessly focus on those, because that will be the foundation to which the rest of the house is built. And it doesn't mean that we never graduate to more advanced techniques or that we never grow. It just means we never leave that foundation. And in basketball, that's your footwork, your shooting mechanics, the way you handle the ball, your IQ. So what I tell folks in any area of life is to figure out the basics of what it is you're trying to improve. If you're trying to improve your business, what are the basic building blocks? If you're trying to improve your marriage, what are the basic building blocks of having a connected and fulfilling relationship? And then just make sure that you never leave those.
So as we think on that point, and I think the most profound part of it, of that lesson is brilliant, the basics, right? If I share my secret to success is to do the basics to a high standard consistently, there seems to be some almost continuity in that message. To those of you listening in right now, just punch into the chat for us maybe what you believe some of the basics are of being brilliant at leading a hearing care business. Punch those into the chat. While you're punching those into the chat, I'm just going to explain how this is going to work for the next 60 to 70 minutes or so. Alan, I'm going to interview you. I'm going to give you a hard time. I'm going to give you a hard time through the lens of being a hearing care business leader. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to look to try and marry what I know about the hearing care industry and what I know about your expertise and see if what we can do is create a cocktail of brilliance. That's the plan. However, based on the fact that we are in an intimate setting and there's a good number of you listening, but not like what we used to, Alan, of like thousands of people in an audience, I want people to be able to throw their questions in too. So if you've got something that you want to be able to ask of Alan, you've got something you want us to be able to lean into the discussion, you've got a performance-related issue with your teams right now, then add it into the chat, put it into the Q&A. I'll field that question with Alan, and we'll make sure that your questions are getting answered. And Marcy's saying that compassion and confidence are a key part of being a basic in this world, and I'm sure that many of these are going to follow in. So, Alan, let's dive into the interview part of what I want to be able to learn from you. And I just want some context. Our hearing care business leaders have gone through probably one of the most challenging parts of business leadership in their life. And, state mandates of closing things down, huge uncertainty about where next revenue is coming from, panic and pandemonium about safety of staff and patients and everything else that's come with it. The group that are listening in right now have spent the last 3 months getting very, 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 very focused on doing the basics to a high standard consistently, and they're now in a fairly strong position. Yet my belief is there are a handful of people who are somewhere like flat out exhausted. Like what they've done is they've worked like crazy to avoid relegation and had a couple of high fives as they've gone through it. But now we're at the point where there's an even bigger opportunity in front of us, yet the energy levels aren't necessarily where they would be naturally most centered to be able to go on and live another chapter. Have you ever seen anything like that in the world of sport? And where you've seen that in the world of sport, what have you seen people do to allow them to be able to actually reach a higher level of performance, even though fatigue might be in play?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, fatigue and sport certainly are almost synonymous, especially when you look at the length of some of the professional seasons. I know, unfortunately, we haven't had very many sporting events taking place over the last 12 weeks, but, a typical NBA season, which I'm most familiar with, spans almost 9 months, which means it's different than a singular event where you want to peak and have great performance at one point in time. These folks need to be at peak performance for 9 straight months. And that is incredibly challenging. And of course, to you all need to be in peak performance 12 months. I mean, you don't have the luxury of taking 3 months off to rest and recharge, or you don't necessarily have an off season, of course, excluding the pandemic we're wrapping up on. So what I'd say is most important is self-care, is making the time. And this can be really challenging when you're in a position of service. And I have high empathy for you all, because I know that you're serving everyone in your practice. You're serving your colleagues and your coworkers, you're serving your clients and your customers, but you can't ever forget to serve yourself first. That is leadership 101. And unfortunately, it gets twisted sometimes in society where people believe that if you're taking time to fill your own bucket first, that's actually an act of selfishness. And nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the only way that you can pour into anyone or anything to your maximum ability is if you fill your cup first. And that's what great players understand. LeBron knows that if the Lakers were playing tonight, that the team only has its best chance of being successful if he shows up to the Staples Center tonight as the best version of himself, which as a basketball player means he needs to get quality sleep the night before. He needs to be hydrated. He needs to make sure he's eating well with nutritious food. He needs to make sure that he's doing his corrective exercises and his stretches and the stuff in and around that will allow him to show up as his best self. And not only is that his obligation to the team, that's what everyone's counting on. That's what everyone in the Lakers organization is counting on, him showing up as his best self. If you and I turn on the TV tonight, Phil, we'd be counting on him to show up as his best self because we're about to invest 3 hours of our life watching him. And I just want you all listening to realize that I have so much, I know how noble it is that you always want to serve others. And many of you spend the vast majority of the day serving in a business capacity. And then you go home and you serve your families and your spouses and your children and your churches and your communities. It's like you're always giving. And I really and truly respect and commend that. But you will experience burnout. You will experience fatigue. You'll hit plateaus if you don't prioritize yourself. And I believe in taking a holistic approach. So I recommend that you set aside time each day to fill your bucket mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, if appropriate to you. And I've got an exercise that can help you get some clarity on that if you guys would like something a little action-oriented.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, what I try and help folks do, my number one goal is to help people close performance gaps. And a performance gap is the gap between what we know we're supposed to do and what we actually do in our daily behavior. And if I can get folks to start to close that gap and do the things they know, inevitably performance will skyrocket. So what I'd love everyone to do, and you don't have to do it right now, you can reflect on this over the weekend, but is come up with a list of the 4 or 5 things, activities that really fill your own bucket. That when you do these things, you have an extra smile, a little extra pep in your step. You just feel energized. This could be taking a long walk or a jog around the lake. This could be listening to an audiobook or a podcast or classical music. It could be reading or meditation or prayer. Could be taking a yoga class or a spin class. Anything that fills your bucket. And I want you to come up with an exhaustive list of the things that you love to do. And then on another piece of paper, I want you to make a list of what your morning and evening routine looks like. And I know that morning and evening routines have really been shaken up over the past few months. But generally speaking, what do you do for the first 60 minutes when you wake up? And what do you do for the last 60 minutes before you go to bed? And I also realize that not every day of the week is the same. But I do know that we are, as human beings, creatures of habit. And we tend to do similar things at similar times on most days of the week. And once you've kind of etched this out, then I want you to compare your 2 sets of notes. And I want to see how often you are making time to do the things that you know fill your own bucket. And many times, this is when folks start to see a wide performance gap. They know that doing these things makes them feel great. And yet on the bookends of the day, where we tend to have more control over what we do than during the meat of the day, they're not doing those things. And I don't say that to call anyone out or make anyone feel bad. I say it only to highlight the fact that if you start slowly infusing those things that you know fill your bucket into the bookends of your day, you'll feel better, you'll be more energized, you'll be able to combat and resist fatigue, and you will be showing up every day personally and professionally as the best version of yourself.
Alan, what are some of the consequences you've seen of people running on empty, full of adrenaline, doing what needs to be done? And think about both the workplace as well as on the court as well. What have you seen show up where people have got best intentions, given it everything they've possibly got? What consequences have happened when people haven't taken the time to be able to make sure that they're looking after themselves?
The list of when we're running on fumes, the things that initially pop into my mind is we decrease our ability in critical thinking and problem solving. We become irritable, which then means we're not as compassionate or empathetic in our relationships. Just even physical fatigue is going to prevent the energy required to do a good portion of what your job entails. And those are just things immediately that come to mind. But you can see how we could really start to pull the thread out of the sweater. If you find yourself constantly grouchy or irritable or not very opening to listening, how is that going to affect the relationships that you have with your team members and your colleagues and coworkers? How might that affect an interaction that you have with a client or customer, especially if they have a grievance or there's an issue that they have? These things, what might start off as something that appears very small can certainly have a huge impact, especially in the relationships component. And then, of course, as leaders and business owners, critical thinking and problem solving need to be two of your most important tools. And if those tools get dull because you're allowing yourself to get fatigued, then you're just simply not able to perform at the level you're capable of. And as I said, I know that when you perform at a high level, that will improve your own self-belief and self-worth and confidence. And as confidence increases, so does happiness and fulfillment. And ultimately, I think that's what most people are chasing. So all of these things are very interrelated. And I've always been a big believer that it's the little things that make a huge difference. It might not sound like it's that big of a deal to binge watch a couple episodes of something on Netflix instead of getting extra sleep, or to skip that workout because you want to return some emails. Like, those at face value don't sound like they're that big of a deal. And in isolated cases, they're not. But if those things become habitual, then we start to have a problem. And what I always, I find comical is, most people, if you look down at your phone and you see that it's about to run out of the battery, you're immediately looking for either a Mophie or a plug to charge your phone, because we would all feel paralyzed if our phones ran out of battery. And yet many people, they're cruising along throughout their day at 10 to 12% from a fatigue level. And that's what I'm hoping folks will take some steps to change.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one. And I know that I've been guilty of that myself, is trying to run and run and run. We've talked about it on times with some of our scheduling conflicts and things that have created challenges through the years. But I'm going to just bounce in another direction.
Sure.
Is the hearing care industry, like many industries, have gone through a huge amount of change. And there are a number of things that have been done in triage of saying, how do we react and respond to the times that were being presented on us? And then there's this large reality that says, well, much of this is going to hang around for the foreseeable future now. Yet still, many of the people leading teams have teammates, have employees that are saying, I can't wait for things to get back to normal. How do you lead a team that is looking for things to go back to the way that they used to be?
Well, it's my own belief that things are never going to go back completely to the way that they were, that there's been a shift in the world, and certain things won't go back. And the more we try to resist that or fight that, I think we're just running uphill, and that's not going to help. I think what's most valuable is, as we try to heighten our own self-awareness and our team and business awareness, is we look at the way that we operated pre-COVID-19, and we look at the things and the practices and the systems and the things that we did really, really well. But we also have the courage and vulnerability to look at the things that might have needed a shake-up anyway. And then we do the same exercise over these last 12 weeks since COVID-19 and say, okay, what were the pivots that we were required to make? And how did we handle those? And were any of those pivots that we made, is there some stuff there that would actually benefit us moving forward? That even if and when things get back to some sense of normalcy, are there some new practices and systems that we just put in place, as you said, as kind of a triage, that we should still hold on to, because these things can still continue to work? And then, of course, looking on the other side, what things did we try or experiment with in the last 12 weeks that didn't work near as well as we would have liked? And I think if you can take both of those and then collectively as a team say, okay, what type of plan do we need moving forward? Let's cherry pick from both of those different scenarios and say, how can we move forward? And of course, the hardest part for all of us is the uncertainty and not knowing exactly what that's going to look like, which means all we can continue to do is focus on the portions that we do have control over. Let's focus on our own effort and our own attitude. Let's focus on creating a strategy and preparation, but being nimble enough that we're not so attached to it that if something comes up 6 weeks from now that causes us to change, we're going to be open and flexible to change. Every coach that I've ever worked for goes into the game with a very specific game plan. Here's what we plan to execute. Here's how we're going to try to make it difficult for our opponent to execute. Here are their best players and their tendencies. Here's where we see opportunities where we can expose some of their weaknesses. And they go in with that game plan. And as any coach will tell you, sometimes in the first quarter, you have to completely change your game plan. Maybe your best player, your starting point guard, gets 3 fouls in the first 4 minutes and has to sit for the rest of the first half. Well, that wasn't part of the game plan that you drew up, but you better be able to adapt and change on the fly. So I think it's a matter of combining, getting everyone on the same page, understanding what portions we have control over, coming up with a strategy based on what we can look at over the last 6 to 8 months and put something in place that we feel confident about, but just know that even that most likely is going to have to change at a moment's notice. And those that do adapt most efficiently and effectively will always be the most successful. And, I can think of a handful of businesses that when COVID-19 first hit, did a brilliant job pivoting and adapting. And now that the pendulum's about to swing back in the other direction to some degree, they're the same ones that are pivoting and adapting again. So I think being flexible is incredibly important.
There's flexibility. I'm hearing in that like this importance of an element of a timeout, right? Like let's take a timeout. Let's take stock on what worked well, what could work better, what's here to stay, what was useful at the time but is now no longer relevant, and how do we now carry that forward? One of the things I love about both your work as a speaker and it echoes through your book is this whole premise of next play. Next play. Tell us a little bit more about that if people didn't catch it from the book.
Yeah, and I tell you what, I've leaned on that ideology a lot over the last 12 weeks. Next play is a concept I learned when I was working at DeMatha Catholic High School, and I worked for a gentleman named Mike Jones, who is one of the finest coaches and leaders that I've ever met. And he has a concept that he calls next play, and he says it verbally, but he also has a hand signal that he does this, which, if you've been at DeMatha for more than a couple of months, he doesn't even need to say next play anymore. He can just make the hand motion and players know what that means. And basically what it means is don't worry about the play that just happened. Refocus your lens immediately on the next play that's about to happen because it's the only one you can do anything about. You can't do anything about the play that just occurred. This happens more often when a player makes a mistake. So a player turns the ball over or a player misses an easy shot or the referee doesn't make a call. And the player immediately is dejected. They're disappointed. They feel bad that they turned the ball over. They're angry at themselves for missing the shot, or they're frustrated that the referee didn't call a foul. And you can see it in their body language. You can see it in their facial expressions. And they spend 3 or 4, sometimes 5 seconds thinking, woe is me. And they're worried about something that just took place. And there's nothing that they can do to change that turnover, that missed shot, or that referee's missed call. So the great players are the ones that can wipe that from their memory immediately and focus on the next play, which in basketball, in those 3 examples, is to sprint back on defense. And so I made a mistake on offense. Now I need to get back and play great defense to get it back or to get the ball back. And it's something that takes a tremendous amount of conditioning because I think as compassionate, empathetic human beings, we certainly can have an understanding of why someone would be disappointed in themselves if they dribbled the ball off of their foot or they missed a wide open layup. Like we can understand that, but there's lots of things in life that just because they're understandable, it doesn't mean they're acceptable. And you lower your performance and you let your team down if you spend a few seconds in the game of basketball worried about the play that just took place. So we got to get you focused on the next play. And part of that next play mentality is an acronym that I've been using a lot lately, which is WIN, W-I-N, and it stands for what's important now. And that I believe is the definition of mental toughness. It's the ability to block out all previous experiences, all distractions, all of the chaos in the environment, and have razor sharp precision on what is the most important thing right now that I need to focus on to get the result that I want. And if we can learn to do this more consistently, this ability to move to the next play, then we don't get distracted or drugged down on the past. We don't have to worry about, COVID-19 did this to our business for the last 6 weeks. Yes, it sure did. And that's a valid point, but that's not going to help us moving forward. So let's refocus that lens as effectively and as efficiently as we can. And I will say that with everything I'm sharing today, I know that I say all of this in a very matter-of-fact tone, which makes it sound like it's easy. None of this stuff is easy. I do believe these are basic principles, but basic and easy are not synonymous. People often use those words interchangeably, but they don't mean the same.
No way.
Yeah, these words are basic, but it's not easy. So I'm saying that with compassion and empathy because I know firsthand there is nothing easy about immediately moving to the next play when the one that just occurred was really, really challenging to be able to swallow.
And that's a tough thing for a leader to be able to drive from a cultural point of view, right? Is to be able to say that actually the conversations that we're having with our teams are always about what's important now and what's our next play. What's important now? What's our next play? What's important now? What's our next play? You see, because it's very easy to be able to say, well, let's keep looking back over the past and let's get on our soapbox. Let's all, get the tissue box out together and wipe our eyes and feel sorry for ourselves about what's not. And I love some of the things that I see you share about how you can be a great parent when your kids are involved in sporting effects. And it makes me think about how some of us act as business leaders, that when things aren't going our way, we start to create either a yeah but mindset, or we start looking at what everybody else is up to and start pointing the finger, and whether that's, if the manufacturer gave us better prices, we'd be getting results, or if only that so-and-so would actually really do the work on trying to close those deals better, would be where we needed to be, or if that mailer got out a day earlier, then we would have got the results. So all these if only type complaints where everything is external and pointing things at other people. What does Alan Stein say to that and its impact upon performance if we're thinking about pointing blame at elsewhere?
Well, all of the things that you just mentioned, it's important folks realize those might be true and they might be valid, but it doesn't help improve your situation. If the goal is high performance, then if you know where your North Star is and you know what the end result is. So in a game of basketball, it's trying to have more points than the other team has by the end of the game. In business, you can decide what metrics, but if you decide this is where we're trying to take our business, then the only thing you need to focus on is what is going to move us forward. And any of those, scenarios that you just placed, as true as they may be and as valid as they may be, focusing on them does absolutely nothing to move you forward. It does nothing to get you closer to your goal. So those things are the equivalent of walking around with a huge weighted vest. The minute you can take that weighted vest off, you'll be much more nimble, in this case, emotionally nimble, to be able to move forward. And, one of the trilogies that I talk about in my keynotes and my workshops is this trilogy of blaming, complaining, and making excuses. That's kind of a trilogy, a default that a lot of people immediately go to when things aren't going well. They blame someone else or they blame circumstances. They complain that things aren't going very well, or they make an excuse about it. And I think the three examples you just gave, we could put into one, if not two of those buckets. And I use absolutes very, very sparingly, but blaming, complaining, and making excuses will never, ever improve your situation, or in this case, move you forward and improve your business. So the sooner we can, get rid of doing those three things as leaders, and then make sure that we make that contagious with our team, the better off we'll be. And I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I have to say that getting rid of those three things, there's nothing easy about that, especially when you look at the last 12 weeks. Let's even start it with Kobe Bryant passing away, to COVID-19, to the social injustices and unrest that we're feeling. That is a lot to soak in 3 months. And it would be easy to blame, complain, or make excuses for any of those things on why we're not performing at the level we're capable of. And once again, as valid and as true as those excuses and complaints might be, they're not going to help you. So I've really worked hard to try to get rid of those three things from my own mindset. And I've tried to insulate myself with people that hold me accountable. So when I do have a moment of weakness and they find me complaining about something or making an excuse, those people hold me to the fire and wake me up and give me the awareness that I need to get rid of it and move forward.
Let's keep the metaphor alive of being a parent on the sidelines of a sports game. Now, if the parent on the sidelines of the sports game is shouting at the coach to make different decisions, is attacking other players' underperformance, or giving the officials a hard time about the decisions that they're making, what message does that send to the player on the pitch that is being led by that parent?
Well, two things. First and foremost, before what they're actually modeling, which is what's most important, especially if we're talking about younger players, all they're doing in that moment of what you just described is adding unnecessary noise and chaos. They're actually making it more challenging for their child to perform, because now it's that fire hose approach. They're hitting them with so much different stimulation that the player can't focus on what it is that they're supposed to focus on. And especially at the youngest ages, where kids are just learning their bodies and they're learning the sport and they're learning where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to do, the last thing they need is any extra stimulation that's going to take away from that. So on a very acute level, that's an issue. On a much broader level, which I love the direction at which you were taking this, you are modeling for your child that it is okay to make excuses, to blame others, or to complain. And because ultimately that's what you're doing with this. And that's simply not behavior on a conscious level that I know most parents, want to model for their children. They don't realize that that's actually what they're doing. And, as all parents know, what we model for our children is vastly more, influential than what we say to them. I can sit my kids down and have a long talk about being respectful, or I can just make sure that anytime they see me interact with another human being, I'm always respectful, no matter who that is. And them seeing that type of behavior will help them learn that lesson much more than having a sit-down one-on-one chat would.
And how does that show up in the workplace, right? You're leading a team, you're responsible towards others, they look towards you as a North Star. Like, how does that play out in that world as well, right? We can see it from a kids on the sideline point of view, but how does it show up in your workplace?
Well, as a leader, we want to model the behavior that we want to see from the rest of our team. As leaders, it's up to us to crystallize the vision, the mission that we have, and then to make sure that we're fostering an environment that's conducive to building the type of culture that will allow us to achieve that mission or vision. And anytime your team sees you as the leader making an excuse or blaming or complaining, ultimately you're just poking a hole in your boat. And now you've got a little bit of a leak. And when the team sees that that's what the leader does, then unconsciously they believe that's okay for them to do it. So if you have a leader that's constantly making excuses or complaining, pretty soon you're going to have a team that constantly make excuses and complaints. And that's when we've got a problem. So if you create a culture where that is accepted, then we're going to have an issue. And that was, when it comes to behavior and it comes to culture, one of the early mantras I learned as a coach is there are only two options when it comes to the behavior of your teammates. That's you either accept it or you correct it. There is absolutely nothing in between. Every single thing someone on your team does every single day is either something that is in alignment with your vision and mission and culture, and it's something that you want to recognize and praise and encourage, or it's something that you don't. And if it's under the don't category, then you have to coach that. You have to lead that. There has to be a change. And if we can put it through that binary filter, that's how we can really strengthen culture. That way we can say, the way Phil behaves every single day is exactly what we're looking for. So we're going to acknowledge it and praise it and encourage it. Or if the way Phil is behaving right now, he's blaming, complaining, and making excuses, this is not in alignment with where we're trying to go. I, as the leader, need to coach him up. I need to help resolve that. And that's where, of course, things like emotional intelligence or knowing exactly what to say comes into play, so that you can help individualize the way and customize the message that you'll give that person. Because if we had a team of 10, the way that I would coach you might not be identical to the way I'd coach one of your colleagues. You might have different needs. I might have to come at you from a different angle to get you to make those improvements. And that's really, to me, what the essence of leadership is. It's being chameleon-like enough to know your team well enough that you know how to coach each and every one of them to the highest performance possible.
So many of us running a small business, we have to wear different hats, right? And some of those hats get merged, and I think it's sometimes difficult to understand the roles and responsibilities within those hats. So in your mind, what is the difference between a player, a coach, a manager, and then a leader? What are the differences in those four very, very uniquely defined job roles? So player, coach, manager, leader.
If we're going to look at it through the lens of sport, and I believe that the traits that it takes to be successful in each of those positions most certainly are not mutually exclusive. I think
Right.
the traits that you would want from a great coach, you would also want from a great teammate, you'd also want from a manager. But one of the most important parts on any team or in any business is role clarity, and is being able to define exactly in each of those pillars that you just mentioned, what exactly is it that your role is? What is it that the team needs from you to do to the best of your ability to give us the best chance to be successful? And if there's any ambiguity to that, it's a demotivator. Folks need to know not only what their role is, but they need to be able to embrace it, and they need to work to star in it to the best of their ability. Then conversely, everyone else, whether they're a coach, player, or manager, what have you, needs to show a great appreciation, respect, and show that they value that other person's role. And one of the other most important pillars to this, and then I'll give a little more clarity on my specific answers, is everyone needs to know how their role impacts the team. They need to know where do they fit into the big puzzle, because that's another demotivator. If I'm showing up every day doing what you're telling me to do, but I don't really understand why I'm important or how I'm part of the big picture, I will quickly become demotivated. And that's where it's up to the leader to be able to point that out. Phil, this is your role. This is why it's important, because this is what you add to our team. And then we can also talk about standards and expectations. You know, I've used this example before, and this is so important when it comes to clarity. For the listeners, if you don't know, I have 10-year-old twin sons and an 8-year-old daughter. And the other day we were done eating dinner, and I asked my 10-year-old son, Luke, to clean the table. That was all I said. Luke, I need you to clean the table. Well, to a 10-year-old, cleaning the table means I'm just going to pick up the plates and utensils, set them in the sink, and sprint to my room and turn on my iPad. That was his definition of clean. I actually had a very different definition of clean, which is we're going to wipe each dish and utensil off. We're going to put them in the dishwasher. You're going to take a rag and you're going to wipe down the table. And if you knocked any crumbs on the floor, you're going to vacuum those up. That was my definition of clean. Well, clearly, we both had different definitions of clean, but because I didn't articulate that to him, he defaulted to his definition. So I kind of chuckled when I got a little bit frustrated with him. His lack of cleaning the table to my expectation was not his fault. It was my fault, because I didn't tell him the expectation of what clean meant to me or what it was that I needed.
Such a big point.
Yeah, and that's what I think we have to make sure as leaders, we're telling people, you know, what their role is, how they fit into the big picture, and the standard and expectation we have for them to perform it so that they know whether or not they're doing what it is that we need. And this is not something that we just do, you know, once a year during a once a year review. This is something that is constantly recalibrated. And one thing I found, if let's just say, Phil, that you and I work together and I'm your direct report, you oversee me and I work with you. And anyone listening, you can try this with your colleagues and coworkers. We're going to have me write down what I believe my role is on the team. What is my responsibilities? What is it that you all need me to do every day for the team to be successful? And I want this list to be rather narrow, because if I'm expected to do 27 things every day, it's very rare that I'll be pretty good at them. Like, what are the 3 most important things that Phil needs to do every day? And then separately, I want Phil to write down the 3 things that he thinks I'm supposed to do every single day. And let's compare those lists. And once again, there's usually when a performance gap will arise. I report to Phil every day, and yet I think I'm supposed to be doing this. He thinks I'm supposed to be doing this. And now there's some dysfunction, some miscommunication. Phil's constantly getting frustrated with me because I'm not doing what he thinks I'm supposed to do when I don't even know that's what I'm supposed to do in the first place. And it's this big, huge web of confusion, when if we would just sit down shoulder to shoulder and eye to eye and iron these things out, and Phil could say, Alan, here are the 3 most important things for you to do every day. Here's the standards and expectations at which I need you to do them. And here's how they fit into the big picture. This is why your 3 contributions are so important to our culture and our team.
So big.
Have that conversation once a month, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And this is where I've seen a lot of groups fall short, is when COVID-19 happened, some people had to let team members go or had to furlough someone, which means automatically the team members that were left had to start wearing more hats than they were wearing before. And if leaders didn't take the time to re-clarify those 3 points, or you don't re-clarify them when we get back to some sense of normalcy, you're going to have to dig yourself out of a hole. So that might be one of the most important things that we talk about today, is making sure.
It's a huge lesson. And I'm urging everybody to go do that work with all of the important stakeholders that work in your organization. Even if you think your organization is only you, think about the freelancers, the other partners that you work with, etc. And let's see if you can get clarity on you both being on the same page of what are the 3 most important roles and responsibility to be delivered for of each point.
And despite that large mouthful I just said, I never originally answered your question. So let me answer your question.
know.
If we're looking from a sports standpoint, the player's job is to play hard, to play smart, and to play together, to do everything within their control to give the team the best chance to win. The coach's job is to provide strategy, to improve execution, and to support the players by teaching them and leading them and mentoring them and encouraging them. And a manager is kind of to fill in and around and support both groups to the best of their ability. So as you can see, there's many traits that would bleed over into any of those 3 groups, but it's so important that the players aren't trying to coach, and that the coach is not trying to over here filling up water bottles, because then they're not able to do their role when that's what the manager's supposed to do. And then if we throw parents into the loop, now you've got parents who are trying to officiate, and you've got parents trying to coach from the sideline. I mean, the whole thing is a mess. If each of the 4 major groups, parents, officials, players, and coaches, if those 4 would stay in their lane and do what they're supposed to do, I think you'd see a lot less issues, especially in the world of youth sports.
How does that work, though, when you have to do an element of those roles? Right? There's people listening in right now where they are the star player, the coach to the other support staff, the strategic thinker within the business, and they are the parent to this thing too, because they gave birth to it. They're all of those things. How do they navigate to others which role they're in, so others can understand how to be able to be perceived? Because I think that's the complexity that exists for many people listening in right now.
Yes, and it is really a challenging one. And certainly my hat's off to the folks that find themselves in those positions, because that is not easy. I think it's important to get clarity on, and this can go back to the what's important now, the when mindset. In this moment, which of those 4 responsibilities, or which of those 4 hats is the priority? Which role is most important for you at this time? Is it to be a great teammate and to lend support and to empower the person next to you? Or is it to hold someone accountable and actually lead them or coach them? Or is it to be the strategic thinker? So you just need to figure out at that moment in time, which of those hats is most important, and make sure that you put that one on snugly first, and then make sure that you are communicating that. You know, I'm just such a big believer that we often make things much more complicated by not facing them directly, and not being able to say, hey, Phil, I know that we both have a lot of responsibilities, but in this conversation, I want to focus on, and then outline whatever it is that you're focused on at that time, so that there's no ambiguity. And I said it before, and I'll say it again. Anytime there's anything that's foggy or fuzzy or ambiguous, it's a demotivator, and it increases confusion. And that's what complexity does. So if you find yourself straddling between a lot of different roles, just pick the one that's most important at that time and try to stay in that lane to the best of your ability.
Got it. Lots of the folks listening in right now they are wearing a lot of hats. They do have a lot to be able to do, and they want to get the best out of their team. And their team are good. Like, they love their team, they're responsible towards their team, they have great relationships with their team, but they know that they have more to give. They know that they have a higher level of performance to be able to go out and go reach. How do you help just polish that final level without having them destroy the piece that sits beneath it, without damaging confidence or ruining self-respect, knowing that they can achieve more, but we don't want to actually lower the floor?
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is where we have to trust and respect the process. This is where if you're performing at a level, but you can see that you want to perform at a higher level, and you've got your sights set on that, and that is your North Star, then you need to be able to break down incrementally, what do you need to do in order to reach that higher level? What are the skill sets that you need? What is maybe some new information that you need to be exposed to or to learn? What are some blind spots that you might not be privy to at the moment, but that you have an inner circle that can help you see. So figure out what it is that's going to take to get there, and then come up with a plan, a process, if you will, of what that'll take. And the more granular you can get on the process, the better off you'll be. This is in alignment with what I was saying, where, every single person on your team, when you guys get back to business, every person on your team should know the 3 most important things they should be doing every single day. And those 3 things, again, they might not be the same every day, but every day when they show up, they better have some clear vision on what those 3 things are. And I would say the same thing for trying to improve performance. Here's the level I am. Here's the level I want to achieve. What are the 3 most important things that will help me get there? And then what's my strategy for doing them? Like I said, do I need new information? Do I need to read or watch something different? Do I need to sit down with someone that can help me see a blind spot? But need to be able to figure those things out. And depending on, what it is that you're trying to achieve, then you need to figure out, okay, what do I need to do this month to get me closer to that? Yeah. What do I need to do this week to get closer to that? And then the most important question that we should all ask ourselves every morning when we wake up, what do I need to do today that gets me just a little bit closer to that? Because if every day when you wake up, you can say, what do I need to do to get closer to my goal? And every night before you go to sleep, you can check the box and say, I did that thing to a high level, then it's not a matter of if you'll achieve it. It's just a matter of when. That's where we're starting to lay the bricks that will eventually build the entire wall. So it's always going to be in that process and not worrying so much about the outcome.
So focus on the process, not the outcome. Chase the steps, don't chase the finish line. Look to be able to say, how do I focus on the micro actions that I can take to get me closer, knowing that I then might surpass it?
Absolutely. Brilliantly said.
Let's catch a breath for a second. Alan, grab a sip of water if you need it, etc. I want to just reach out to those of you that are listening. We are somewhere like just past the halfway point of the interview part with Alan. And I'd love to know if you've got something from this already that you're going to put into practice, something you're going to use, something you might take action on, something you can use today or this week. If so, punch it in the chat, because I want to know where your head's at. My fear in all of these scenarios is that we're talking and you're not listening. You've got 3 other windows open on your laptop. You're doing other things and your head's not engaged in this moment. And I do know that moments like these are only useful if they trigger a thought up here that changes the feeling right in here that then results in you doing something differently onwards from that point. So tell us something you might do differently or you might act upon based on the conversation that you've been privy to so far. And Jimmy's saying absolutely going over the 3 things with the team, right? Such an easy thing to do, but carving the time out to it rarely happens. But in doing so, there's going to just be so much more momentum and efficiency. And Nancy's saying the same thing. I love asking the 3 things of the team. John is saying, I'm going to sit down as a team of 3 and clarify our roles and next steps. I'm also scheduling a weekly check-in meeting. Sally says, I think a list of expectations is great. We will do this immediately. And note that the list of expectations is the 3 most important things, not a complete list of every expectation, because that could result in overwhelm, Alan, right? Am I right in saying that would be almost too much data to process?
Absolutely. And there'll be certain things like, let's say, check email, for example. That's probably on everyone's list. But I'm hoping, unless maybe you're unless you're the lead assistant, that's not the main focal point of your job. So I'm not implying that everyone only does 3 things, but we want to know what are the 3 most important things that you need each team member to do every day for you all to be successful. And of course, that starts with us as the leader. When I show up, what are the 3 big things that I need to take care of? And I'm so glad that that's something that's resonating with you all. And I have the utmost confidence that when you execute that, you're going to see more clarity and you will see performance increase. And this is such a great time to do it because of how things have been shaken up over these past 12 weeks. And I'm sure that people's roles have changed over the last 12 weeks. So this is actually a great time to refocus that lens.
Such a huge point. And I like the fact that Michael's taken the time to be able to craft out where he's coming from. He's like, I'm paying attention. This helped me more in a personal sense, which I know will help me in our business. The first section of the book helped me see that I'm not a peak performer. Something happened a year ago in my personal life that instead of letting go, I withdrew. I lost all self-confidence. It affected my work, my ability to speak and to express myself. This chapter of self-awareness said to control the controllable. I can't control what people do to me, their behaviors and decisions, but I can control my reactions. I was stuck on being mad. It took a lot of energy. Instead of getting back to the basics, I was just surviving daily. Interestingly, I know these things and what I need to do, but I just couldn't do it. Your point that self-awareness leads to humility put it smack in my face, that I need to work on humility. So there you go. Those reminders help me, and I just need to let go and get back to the basics, so I have some work to do. And I'm reading that out loud because I think two things. One, so true, also so brave to be able to put that into a public forum and know that that is how you are feeling right now. And what it tells me, Michael, is that you're going to have the strength to be able to do the work that needs to be done that's next, to be able to take the steps that are key.
Man, that's awesome. Can I add something to that? I mean, first of all,
sure.
I think your ability to own that, to acknowledge that, and as Phil just said, to be so brave to be vulnerable and put that out in front of others is a massive, massive step. And I don't want you to undersell that at all. You should be incredibly proud of the work you've done. And it certainly sounds like you're inspired to continue to do work. And what it made me think of is something I've really been thinking a lot over the last 12 weeks is we've had this roller coaster of emotions, all of us, and they've probably been on a wide spectrum, both personally and professionally. And it reminds me that our emotions are designed simply to inform us. They're not designed to direct us. And this is really important as leaders. It's okay that you're going to feel a wide array of emotions. As a leader, there's nothing wrong with feeling angry or disappointed or discouraged or jealous or frustrated. There's nothing wrong. We have those feelings for a reason. Where we run into a problem is if you allow those feelings to dictate your behavior. If you allow those feelings to dictate the way you communicate with your team or a connection you have with someone on your team, that's where we have an issue. And this is part of the self-awareness pie, where we need to all be able to step back and say, okay, I'm really frustrated right now. You know, I wanted Phil to turn in this proposal. He turned it in, but boy, he really did a half-assed job. I'm really frustrated with Phil. It's okay for me to feel that. I want to take it a step further and try to dissect and go, okay, am I really frustrated that he turned in a substandard proposal, or is there something more to that? Do Phil and I have a history where I feel like he doesn't respect me, and maybe that's what's really causing and fueling this anger? So I want to try to go a little bit deeper and figure out why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. But then the most important part is then I need to say, okay, what's the best way to respond to this that's going to get me what I want, which is for Phil to turn in a better proposal. So what is the best way that I can approach that? Now, what most people do is they simply have a knee-jerk reaction to the emotion they're feeling in the moment. Phil turns this in, I look at it, I'm pissed off, I yell at him, I say something disparaging, I crumple it up, I throw it in the trash, and Phil walks out with his tail between his legs. That is not going to be the best way for me to get what it is that I want and what the team needs. If I can have the composure and the self-awareness to take a breath and try to have empathy and compassion and be able to then follow up with Phil and maybe ask him some insightful questions or be as empathetic and compassionate as I can and realize that I don't have all of the information. There might be a legitimate reason why he just turned something in that wasn't his best work. And let's figure out a way to work together so that I can actually get what it is that I want and the team needs. And when you can have that level of emotional control as a leader, then you're going to be unstoppable. Then it really doesn't matter what goes on in the world. It doesn't matter what goes on with your team, because no matter what someone throws at you, you'll have the composure and the poise to be able to deal with it. And it all goes back to, once something happens, to move to the next play and say, okay, what is it that I want to get? I want Phil to redo this proposal and I want it to be stellar. What is the best behavior I can exhibit right now that greatly increases the chance that's going to happen? And if that's the option I consistently pick, you'll find your performance go through the roof. You'll become so much more of an impactful and an influential leader, and you'll create such better connections with your team. Because you want to have the type of relationship that I don't need to yell and scream and curse at Phil. When I tell him that this wasn't what I was expecting, we have a relationship where he's so disappointed in his own performance that he all of a sudden becomes motivated and inspired to want to redo it. He doesn't want to let me down or let the team down. And we can only do that if we don't allow our emotions to overtake our behavior.
So it's not just labeling an issue It's being brave enough to be able to pinpoint the issue and then let it bounce towards not what's next, and believe in their ability for it to be able to bounce a long distance, believe in their ability to be able to, with your support, go and achieve it. So our job is not to be able to label what's wrong, but identify what could be better and then plan with reduced amount of frictions how that better can become possible.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid. And this is one of the things, Phil, that I've learned most from you just on our craft of speaking. I mean, you're such a polished and brilliant speaker, and arguably the best that I've ever seen at using the power of the pause to make a point. And as you all can see, I'm from my coaching background, sometimes I'm like a runaway freight train. I almost can't get the words out quick enough. And I've really learned from Phil and studied from Phil how important that pause is. And the reason I bring that up is, as a leader, if Phil comes in and turns in this substandard report, I don't have to have an immediate reaction. There's nothing wrong with me, taking the proposal and taking a beat to really process how I'm feeling. Even if I need to say, Phil, thank you for turning this in. I'm going to want to have a follow-up with you probably later today, if not tomorrow morning. I'd like to discuss this. There's nothing wrong with communicating that. I think sometimes leaders feel that everything needs to be done in the moment, in real time. And I'm not taking away that there are certain things that are highly urgent and certain things that do require making a decision right in the heat of battle, but not everything is that pressure cooked. There are certain things where I can say, Phil, at first glance, this isn't exactly what I'm looking for. I need a little bit of time to process my thoughts, and I'd love to be
Hey, Alan, we might have lost you a little there right now. We've got you on a freeze frame of a beautiful facial expression.
Oh, no. Am I back?
You are back. You are back. I think we just finished that point now. And there's a question in the thread here from Jana out in Texas that I wanted to just pose to you to see what you might have to say on it. She says, how do you manage a super passionate team member that, for lack of better terms, needs to stay in her lane? How do you express that without sounding like a jerk? I don't want to squash her passion, but I know we need to address this.
I'm a big believer, as I said, in always meeting the truth head on. And, when I was a child, you could take every kid and you could put them into one of two buckets. You had kids that could swallow a Tylenol pill, and then you had kids that had to have it smashed up in applesauce in order to take the Tylenol pill. And I was actually one of the applesauce kids for an embarrassingly long time. And the reason I bring that up is, as a leader, you need to decide with every single person on your team, can you give them the Tylenol, or do you need to smash it up and put it in some applesauce? And what's most important is, it doesn't matter what you prefer as the leader. And it doesn't matter if you can swallow the Tylenol pill. You need to deliver it in the way that they prefer and that'll resonate with them the most. So the reason I say that is, for this person that you want to confront, and that's another thing is, I know words have emotional connotations, and most people use and view the word confrontation or confront as a bad thing. But confrontation, I just view as meeting the truth head on. That basically there's a behavior that you want to address, and now it is your job as the leader to decide, can I just give her the Tylenol pill, or do I need to put some applesauce with it and sweeten it a little bit? And hopefully you have enough of an emotional connection with her, and you can use your emotional intelligence to figure out the best way to do that. But even the way that you just positioned it in the question, I thought was brilliant. That if I had to say something similar to Phil, and I just say, Phil, I want you to know, man, one of the things that I like most about you, and one of the things that you add the most value to our team, is your passion. I mean, your passion is contagious, and I don't ever want that to change. However, sometimes your passion can bleed over and make you feel like you need to do other people's jobs or other people's roles. And you might not even be aware that you're doing that, but sometimes that can create an issue. So as much as I love your passion, here are the three things that I really want you to stay focused on, and let's try not to deviate out of our lane. Is that something that's acceptable to you? Open the door up and let them offer some feedback, so it's more of a dialogue and not just you're giving them, you're reprimanding them. But I think if you position it in a way that lets them know, hey, you're a huge asset to this team, but you are having some behavior that might not be in all of our best interests. Can we explore that? More times than not, you'll get a very favorable response if you approach them in the way that they prefer.
So you're talking in that scenario that it's Tylenol followed by a little applesauce and then some commitment, right? It's not mixing them together. It's we're going to give them the Tylenol. We're going to follow it with some applesauce, or maybe put it in a sandwich. I don't know. But yeah, I get that. That was a great little role play out. I thought that was fantastic. And Jana seems to agree, which is useful, being as it was her question. Let me just come back in here a second. Okay, Alan, I want to just get some other lessons out of you. You had the privilege in real time being able to work with Kobe Bryant while he was still here with us on the planet. And I know we've had the huge tragedy of losing him this year, etc. But some of the lessons that you captured from that, I think, are remarkably profound. I remember working on a particular piece of content with you when we were out at HBS together in Philly area or wherever it was in New Jersey. And just your story of what you shared there, it still lives in me a ton. So why don't you tell the others about your experience of meeting and then working with Kobe and see if it shares some help to them in the same way as it did to me?
I'd be happy to, Phil. So in 2007, Nike actually flew me out to Los Angeles to work the first ever Kobe Bryant skills, bring in the top high school and college players from around the country for an intense 3-day mini camp with the best player in the world. And I don't know how many of you follow basketball closely, but in 2007, Kobe was the best player in the game. And as I started this conversation, I told you all that basketball was my first identifiable passion. So I've grown up in this basketball bubble my entire life. So I had always heard this urban legend of how insanely intense Kobe's individual workouts were. Well, now that I found myself on his camp staff, I figured this was my chance. This was my shot. So my earliest opportunity, I walked right up to him and asked if I could watch one of his private workouts. He was incredibly gracious, and he smiled and he said, "Sure, man, no problem. I'm going tomorrow at 4." And I got a little bit confused because I had just got done looking through the camp schedule, and the camp schedule clearly said that the first workout with the players was the following day at 3:30. And I think Kobe recognized that confused look on my face because he clarified that with it. That's 4 a.m. Well, I wasn't smart enough or quick enough to come up with a reason on why I couldn't be somewhere at 4 a.m. So I basically committed myself to being there. And I figured if I was going to be there anyway, I may as well try and impress Kobe. I may as well show him how serious of a trainer I was. So I came up with the plan to beat him to the gym. So I set my alarm for 3 a.m. The alarm goes off. I jumped up. I quickly got dressed. I hopped in a taxi and I headed to the gym. And when I stepped out of the taxi, now it's 3:30 in the morning. So, I mean, it was pitch black outside. And yet the moment I stepped out of the taxi, I could see the gym light was already on. Even from the parking lot, I could faintly hear a ball bouncing and sneakers squeaking. I walked in the side door of the gym. Kobe was already in a full sweat. See, he was going through an intense warm-up before his scheduled workout with his trainer started at 4. Out of professional courtesy, I didn't say anything to him. I didn't say anything to his trainer. I just sat down to watch. And for the first 45 minutes, I was shocked. For the first 45 minutes, I watched the best player on the planet do the most basic footwork and offensive moves. Kobe was doing stuff that I had routinely taught to middle school age players. Now, this is Kobe. This was the Black Mamba. So he was doing everything at an unparalleled level of intensity. And he was doing everything with surgical precision, but the drills he was doing were incredibly basic. Well, his whole workout lasted a few hours, and when it was over, I didn't say anything to him. I didn't say anything to his trainer. I just quietly left. But my curiosity got the best of me. I just had to know. So later that day at camp, I went up to him again and said, "Kobe, I don't understand. You're the best player in the world. Why are you doing such basic drills?" And he flashed that $1 million smile. But he said with all seriousness, "Why do you think I'm the best player in the world?" Because I never get bored with the basics. I never get bored with the basics. Kobe Bryant, not only the best basketball player in the world, but someone that has truly mastered his craft, said his secret is that he never gets bored with the basics. And as obvious as that may be to all of us right now, that was a life-changing lesson for me in that moment. It's at that moment that I realized, as I said to you all earlier, that just because something is basic, it doesn't mean that it's easy. If it was easy, everyone else would be doing it. And you all know we live in a world that tells us it's okay to skip steps, tells us we should always be looking for a shortcut or a hack, tells us there's nothing wrong with circumventing the process. But anytime you do those things, you're making a grave mistake, because the basics work. They always have and they always will. And the very, very first step to improving performance in any area of your life, whether it's personal or professional, whether it's individual or organizational, is to not only admit that the basics work, but it's to have the humility to acknowledge that doing the basics every single day is never, ever going to be easy. And, from the moment I learned that from Kobe, that has probably been the foundational pillar of my entire life's philosophy. I mean, forget business. This is how I lead my life, in realizing that the juice is in the basics. And I found anytime that I'm not performing at the level that I believe I'm capable of, anytime I find myself demotivated, anytime I'm not doing what I believe I could be doing, it's usually because I've started to veer away from the basics. And then I just refocus that lens, get back on track, and things usually improve.
There's so many powerful lessons in that story for everybody to be able to listen to. Micro lessons, as well as just, being brilliant at the basics. There's the chance to be able to get there ahead of everybody else. There's a chance to be able to apply yourself to the basics with the right level of intensity. There's the humility of, when receiving compliment towards it, to actually be able to serve the lesson and nothing else. There's so much that goes into that. A question I have for you, though, Alan, is how many times have you shared that story?
Oh, boy. 1,000? Maybe somewhere in that ballpark. I mean, if you're talking about shared publicly, and then whatever number that is, I've told that in rehearsal probably 3 to 4 times that many times. But yeah, I've shared that one a lot.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is that conversation in your professional body of work?
Incredibly important, probably a foundational piece.
And the reason I ask that is because I know that you and I have been in rooms when you were working on that story and that I was working on another bit, and seeing marginal improvements make massive differences, etc., as something is being delivered. Yet what I would also say is to everybody listening in right now, that you have critical conversations, critical stories that you need to share with your patients, with your team, and you maybe heard 1,000 times out of Alan's mouth like right now and thought that was a lot. Yeah, how many times have you told your founder story, your company story, your why choose me and not somebody else story? And all of those important sequences of words that help somebody choose you as opposed to somebody like you. And have you done the work to get 1,000 reps in through a microscope like Alan has on sharing that story, so that you can be confident and fair to yourself that you are achieving a high level of performance consistently? Because if you're not achieving a high level of performance consistently, my guess is because you haven't done the work. It's because you haven't taken the time to be able to decide that it's important enough to be able to repeat in the other direction. So sorry to make an example of you there that way around, my friend, but I thought that there was a hidden lesson in the Kobe story as well that was beneficial for others to be able to latch onto.
No, you nailed it. It's all about getting the reps during the unseen hours, and that was you pulled that out brilliantly.
So I want to open up the floor a little for questions. If you've got anything you want to grab from Alan, then punch it into the chat. If you really want to ask it personally, raise your hand. I'll open your microphone up, give you the chance to be able to ask it vocally over just in the chat. But I want to make sure that your questions are answered. While you're thinking about articulating your questions, Alan, what might be just 2, 3, 4 tips that you could share with us that will help us maximize performance in moments where it matters?
One of the things that I've tried to adopt over the last several years is I'm trying to embrace simplicity. I keep talking about things that are demotivators, and I think complexity is a demotivator. Confusion is a demotivator. So as I've gotten older, I've tried to simplify my life, and I've already made the connection that we choose our habits, and our habits ultimately dictate where we end up in life. Our habits and the things we do on a consistent basis, they'll determine our happiness, our fulfillment, our success, our significance. I mean, you fill in the blank. So we all know at face value how important those habits are. And I just call it a kind of a personal binary filter to making sure that I'm choosing the best habits possibly. So I'm 44 years old. I have this loose vision of the man I want to be 20 years from now. So who do I want the 64-year-old Alan to be? Well, without getting into too much detail for you all, I want the 64-year-old Alan to be someone that is physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. I want the 64-year-old Alan to have a really deep connection with his children, his family, his friends, his favorite clients and colleagues. I want the 64-year-old Alan to be doing what he considers meaningful work in service of others. So that's kind of the loose vision of who I want to be 20 years from now. And now what I do is every decision that I make in my life, large or small, I quickly run through the filter of, will this get me closer to being that guy, or will this take me further away? You know, even from what I'm going to eat for lunch to who I follow on Instagram, is that going to give me a greater chance of becoming that guy, or is that going to decrease my chance? And when I run everything through that filter, it's amazing how simple some of these answers become.
Yeah.
Now, most certainly, I'm not batting 1,000. I'm just as fallible as anyone listening to this. So there's, I don't want anyone to think that every decision I make is in perfect alignment with that. But I own every decision that I make. And when I own it, then I can course correct if need be. And I certainly recognize that time is not promised. There's no guarantee that I'll even see the age of 64. But if I do, I'm very confident that that is the man that I'll become, because that's the life that I'm designing in the present based on my habits and my decisions. And to me, and as basic as that may sound, that's not easy to do, because I'm tempted to make decisions. I'm tempted to make decisions that aren't in alignment with becoming that guy just as much as the next person. But when I use that as my focal point, it certainly helps. And you can use that same exercise, not even just personally. You can use that with your business. Where do you want your business to be 1 year from today? And then every decision that you make, is that going to get your business closer to that, or is it going to take it further away? And if you can consistently put your head on your pillow at night saying the vast majority of decisions I made today were in alignment with becoming that person, or my business becoming that business, then again, it's not a matter of if it'll happen, it's just a matter of when.
Exactly. And Alan, we had a conversation with Inner Circle members a few weeks back where I was talking about the office environment and everything that exists in the business. And I made the point that everything within visual sight of a patient is either adding to or detracting from your brand proposition. Nothing is neutral. Like, it's either adding or it's detracting. And then I hear from you today that you're making decisions towards this North Star of it's either getting me closer to it or it's getting me away from it. Again, you're saying nothing is neutral.
Correct.
So it makes me think that wherever you're at right now with the performance of yourself, the performance of your team, or the performance of your business, are your actions getting you closer to where you want to be, or are they getting you further away? And I think just the consciousness to be able to say, I'm going to apply that filter, it actually becomes quite liberating, right? Because it says, I've got my hands on the wheel. Like, this isn't, let's see what happens. And that's one phrase that I've been sick of hearing over the last 10, 12 weeks is, well, let's see what happens. Like, they're abdicating all responsibility for what happens to someone or something else. And as much as there is a ton we can't control, your message of controlling the controllables, I think, is incredibly, incredibly important for all of us right now. Alan, I know your time is precious. I want to get at some of these questions. And sure. Nancy's asking here about something from your book. She says, you mentioned how important a person's character is. Are there particular questions you would ask during an interview process to help get a feel for a person's character to see if it fits with your office culture?
Oh, boy. Character is an interesting one. I mean, just so we're all working from the same framework, I've always defined character is how you'd behave when no one else is watching. And that's one of the trickiest parts, I believe, of an interview process is both parties know that person is there putting their best foot forward. That person is there on some level doing everything they can to increase the chance that they'll get that job. And that's why we all know there have been times where you've hired someone who said and did all the right things during the interview, but then their actual daily behavior was not in alignment with everything they said and did. So that one is incredibly challenging. Boy, from a question standpoint,
let me think on that with you as well. I think it's a fun little thing to jam out. So what about a question like, what is maybe one thing that you've done in your past that you're not so proud of?
I like that.
And that kind of question is if they say, well, I once stole a peanut from my sister's peanuts when we were on a plane once and I didn't tell her. Like, you've probably got a pathological liar. Right, on your hands, or culturally speaking. But I think, giving people the opportunity to talk about mistakes, challenges, and obstacles and things they've done in their past that have shaped their character, might allow you to see more of their character, because they'll tell you something they regret, something they acted upon that didn't work out the way they wanted. And without you asking, they'll tell you how they responded to it.
Love that. That's
If not that, there's the hypothetical scenario. You paint out a hypothetical scenario, ask somebody what would they do. And then you might get a chance to be able to see more of their character. Manny's got a question on here as well, and Alan, we'll see if we can jam this one out together too as well. I always want to relate to my patients. However, they all have a different story they want to hear. How do you act quick on your feet to relate to that particular person?
From my perspective, from a coaching standpoint, and I love the way that you brought this up, coaching mantra 101 that I learned at a very young age is, it's not about me, it's about you. And I also learned the key is to connect first and to coach second, which is something that you just brought up in that question, even if you didn't realize it. I think relating is about going to their sandbox to play, not trying to get them to come to yours. So I think it would be best served for you to ask certain questions about what's important to them. You know, what do they enjoy doing, or what are their favorite memories, and just learn more about them. And as you're asking those questions, you'll start to unpack some things that you have some commonalities or that share interest. But what's most important when relating to someone else is showing them that what's important to them is also important to you, and figuring that thing out. So maybe you're asking some questions and they really love boating. Or maybe they love their grandchildren and they're so proud of their grandchildren, whatever that may be. But the more of that you can uncover, then you can figure out, where does that fall into play. Now, with that being said, I don't know very much about boating. I haven't been on very many boats. So if Phil was one of my patients and he absolutely loves boating, I don't have a whole lot that I can add to the boating component. So there's two things I can do. One, I can continue to just ask him questions so I can learn more about it. Let him educate me. Let him teach me about boating. Let him share why he loves it so much. And then not in a chance of one-upmanship, but then there's probably something in my life that I'm just as passionate about that he is to boating. And maybe that's something where we could bring it full circle. So I might be able to say, I love basketball as much as Phil loves boating. So what we actually have in common is we're both very passionate about something. We both have a strong love for a hobby or something like that. So I think when it comes to relating, don't worry about the differences. Focus on what's important to that other person and find ways to really highlight that and make them feel great about it.
I agree with that, Alan, as well. I'm going to add to it a touch as well, is the thing we must make sure we don't do on this is steal it. You think you're looking to try and relate to someone, whereas what you could potentially be doing is stealing it from them. They say, man, I have so much love and respect for my grandkids. And you say, yeah, me too. Let me tell you about my grandkids, right? Is you just stole that moment of emotion from them when what you were trying to do was to be able to relate. There's a few things that we can learn on this from some of the greats. Mutual friend of ours, Alan, is Michael Stein Jr, right? Wrote The Coaching Habit. And a key question in The Coaching Habit, there you go, look at that, prop on cue, is Michael talks about the AWE question, which is, and what else? And I think the principle of the and what else question is a great way to be able to connect. It's just peel back the layers of the onion and say, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. I think if you do have a story to share about grandkids in this scenario or boating, let it get to the end of the story before you add your chapter. Let it go the distance. If you don't have another story, let it get to the end of the chapter and then say, thank you for teaching me. See, boating is not my thing. I'm far more into fishing. I'm far more into needlepoint. I'm far more into basketball or whatever it might is. But you know what? I think my passion for basketball is just as aligned as your passion for boating. Pause. Now, if they do not desire to ask you more about your passion, you have no responsibility to share it with them. Let them say, and what else is where it would come from. And I think what we're all talking about is the work of the great late Dale Carnegie, which is the goal to be interested and not interesting when it comes towards these coachable moments, is to say, how do we show more interest in them and let them be the star of the show? And Manny, this relates very much to what we talk about on copy on websites, what we talk about and how we communicate about our value proposition. The star of the show is the patient. If you're trying to sell yourself as the star of the show, you're playing the role of player, not the one of coach, not the one of gold, not the of guide or leader. You're playing the role of player, and you can't compete on that, because otherwise they're going to want to compete with you, which means there's a winner and a loser, and chances are the loser might be you. Alan, does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely perfect. What you just shared there is pure gold. It's pure gold from being an effective leader. It's pure gold from being the best teammate that you can be. It's pure gold as a parent. Anytime that you can make the other person shine, make the other person feel heard, make the other person feel valued, you become the most magnetic and attractive person in any room you're in. And when your goal is to serve your patients, that's what you should be doing with every single one of them. They should leave in a better emotional state than when they arrived. And what Phil just laid out right there is exactly how you do that. That was absolutely perfect.
So as we bring this towards a close, Alan, rally cry from your point of view. What is something people can do today or tomorrow, in addition to what you've shared, that would be almost a rally cry from you that means that they are likely to get in a heightened level of performance today, this week, or certainly by the end of next?
Let's focus on the self-awareness portion. And what I'd like for you to think of, I don't know, 7 or 8 to 10 kind of values or traits that you believe are most important for you to be not only successful, but to be happy and fulfilled. And I want you to kind of score yourself on those traits. You could do a typical 1 to 10 scale, or you can, if you want to give yourself a grade, a letter grade, that's fine. And then find 2 or 3 people that you believe know you the best and that you trust will tell you the truth. People that you know care enough about you and want to see you happy and fulfilled that they're willing to tell you what you need to hear, not just what you want to hear. And then ask them to score you in those same areas. And then let's see, once again, let's compare the 2 sets of notes. And this is not about good or bad. This is not about right or wrong. This is about making sure that we're aware of the things that we do well, and we're aware of the areas where we have some opportunities for growth. If I fill out my report card and I give myself a 9 out of 10 on the ability to actively listen, but I ask the 3 people that know me the best and they all give me a 4 or a 5, well, then obviously there's a disconnect there. The way I'm viewing myself is not the same way that others are viewing me. And it's something I'm going to want to take a deeper look into, because once I can come to some consensus from both vantage points, my vantage point as well as theirs, and I can say, okay, here's some traits that I do pretty well with. Here are some opportunities for growth, some that I want to make sure I improve. Now we're at least attacking this future process that we'll put in place from an area of accuracy. I'll know that this is really what I need to be working on. I'll know that, and if they can provide examples, Alan, here was a time where I didn't feel like you were listening attentively, or I didn't feel like you cared. If we can, the more information that we can collect, the better off we'll be. And that will give us this nice platform. And that's kind of the self-audit that you'll be doing with your team. The world sees us.
You're getting so excited on this, Alan. You're breaking the internet.
That's what I do, man. Sorry about that.
I'm conscious of your time. So grateful for you carving some of it out to be able to spend time with the Inner Circle members today. So thank you both for your contribution today and for your friendship. I'm going to ask you in a second where people can find out more about you. But before I do so, you all know that words are my thing. When we're in a virtual setting like this and we bring on board a guest, I can't get you to clap. I can't get a round of applause. I can't get you to have a conversation with Alan in the corridor and high-five him and tell him how awesome he was. What I'd love for you to be able to do is, if you were to think about describing this session to somebody either later today or tomorrow or next week, or somebody else out in your team that they missed out, how would you describe this session? What word might you use as an adjective to describe what you've just been through, learning from some of Alan's wisdom? And let's use that in place of applause and allow Alan to see some of the thoughts that you are picking up from his contributions pouring into your world today. So thank you for punching those in. And whilst those are going into the chat, Alan, tell us all where they can find out a little bit more about you or anything else that you would like to share as we wrap the show up.
Most certainly. Well, the pleasure was all mine, Phil. I appreciate your leadership, your mentorship, and most certainly your friendship. I certainly keep this on my desk, and it's had a profound impact on me. I mean, I'm someone that's always been fascinated with words and with language, maybe not to the degree that you are, but it's been so neat to actually apply the principles from your book just in my daily communications. I think the one that has had the biggest impact is when I phrase a question with, would you be open to, or are you open-minded to? And it's been amazing how it's improved the way that whatever it is that I'm asking has been received for the reason that you outline in your book. So your work has had a really profound impact on me. I try to be real simple with everything, folks. You can find anything you need about me at alansteinjr.com. I'm at Alan Stein Jr. on the major social channels. And if you don't already have the book, you can just go to raiseyourgamebook.com. I love engaging and chatting. So if anyone wants to keep this conversation going, you can always email me, Alan at alansteinjr.com. If you had a question and we didn't get time to answer it today, I'd be happy to respond, personally or directly. So the pleasure was all mine. This was a lot of fun. And I just appreciate you all investing your attention in the last 90 minutes.
Thank you, Alan. And if you have enjoyed today, grab a screen grab of Alan on screen right now. See what you might want to be able to do to share that out on social. If you want to hashtag OG in a circle, what we'll be able to do is to be able to group all that stuff together on social. And how can they include you on that, Alan, as well, if they want to be able to tag you in for your brilliance from the social point of view?
Yeah, you can just tag at Alan Stein Jr. That would be great. I'll certainly repurpose it and amplify it on my end. And like I said, if anything really resonated and you guys want to dive deeper, drop me a line via email or social, or even if you have additional questions, or even if you disagree with a point of view. I'm all about just furthering dialogue so that I can improve. And certainly if there's anything I can do to help you all improve, I'd be honored to do it.
Alan Stein Jr., thank you so much for kicking us off with our summer camp. You were awesome, and I look forward to connecting with you, going for a run or a workout at some point in the not-too-distant future when we can be in the same space, right? That's going to be a ton of fun. See you again, my friend. Thank you all for joining, and I'll be speaking to the rest of you at some point real soon. Take care, guys. Thank you.